calm down. Mama, I'm fine, don't worry. Go back out to sea, sail home, sweet home, where the ships must go to get all cleaned up and put away.
Hello and welcome to today's live stream. I am Dakota from Galt Advocacy, and we're going to be talking about IHSS today. But I mean, of course, if you've been here before, we talk about all kinds of things, special needs. If you've got questions you want to ask, put them in the comment section. Even if you're watching this after the live stream, go ahead and leave comments. We always are going through afterwards, and we try to answer any questions that we see coming through. So, see, we already got a few people here. You guys must have been waiting for us. I haven't been here a couple weeks, so it's good to be back. I'm glad to be back, and we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, which is IHSS. Now, one of my not favorite things to talk about is when people lose hours. It's sad. It's, we hate to see it, but it is probably, of all the different special education topics, the thing that I know the most about. So hopefully we'll have lots of good information. We'll be able to explain a lot of things and all of that, but I will give a couple of minutes for people to show up here. I don't think we have anything in particular to announce work-wise. Okay, we don't have anything to announce. We don't have any seminars coming up, but as always, if you do want us to do a seminar, if you have a lot of people in your area who you think would benefit from hearing about our special needs things, about special education, and we have a lot of different topics. We talk about regional center and IHSS, protective supervision, adult and aging, like when you have someone with special needs who's getting older. We have a lot of different topics we talk about when we do a seminar. So if you have an area you think we should go to, because there's a lot of people that need to hear from us, then let us know. Put together a group that wants to attend, and we can maybe make a plan for it.
We're hiring for our media team if you're local to Sonoma County.
Yes. Another thing we figured we can announce this is that we are trying to hire someone else to do some of our social media things, to do kind of this work like I'm doing right now, to do the live streams and posting more things on our Facebook. So if you are local to the area here in Sonoma County or Santa Rosa more specifically, where's the job listing? I don't know.
On Indeed.
On Indeed. So just want to throw that out there. If you are looking, I think it's a part-time position, like 20 hours a week. So if you're looking for extra work and you have experience in doing social media and have that online presence, then that is what we're looking for. All right, we've got some people here, so I think, safely jump into our main topic. You probably saw it. We're going to be talking about the reasons why you might lose IHSS hours and the avenues that are available to you to try and get those back. So this is kind of a big topic. There's a lot of different things to talk about, but I'm just going to jump into it. If you have questions along the way, leave them in the comment section. I'll get to them whenever I have a break. So briefly, I just want to say this is what we're talking about here specifically is going to be for someone who already has hours. Doesn't necessarily have to be protective supervision, but of course that is what we talk about a lot. But this is someone who did get IHSS hours and maybe has had them for a very long time, but then when you lose them, then what do you do? If you just got denied for protective supervision or for other IHSS hours, we've talked about that before. I'm sure we'll talk about that again. And if you have questions specifically about that, we can ask that. But in this case, we're going to be talking about you've had hours and they got taken away. So what's the difference there? So first off, I will say when it comes to you've lost hours, why did you lose hours? There are so many different reasons that a person can lose hours. However, we've been hearing one that is fairly weirdly common recently, and we wanted to bring that up. We had a case that we were just working on the other day of someone who is I think in their mid or late 20s, and they've had IHSS for a very long time, over 10 years, maybe even like 15 years. And they've had protective supervision. And then all of a sudden, after all these years, all of a sudden this year, it gets taken away. It gets taken away, and we get involved. We take it to a hearing. We bring it up, present our case. And when the judge asks the county, why did all of a sudden you take away the hours after he had qualified for so many years? Like what changed? What was the difference? They said that it was because of new training that the social workers had received, that now, with this new training in mind, they found that this person no longer qualified for protective supervision. Now, this is not the only case we've heard this. We've actually heard this from quite a few people, that all of a sudden this year, maybe a little bit into the end of last year as well, that they are saying, we've retrained all of our social workers, and they no longer have a need for, we retrained all social workers, and now they are correctly identifying when a person no longer needs protective supervision. The thing is, the rules didn't change. Like, the qualifications for how a person gets protective supervision hasn't changed in all of these years. They're just saying that now, across the board, across the whole state, they're training their social workers better, and is always resulting in hours being taken away. Doesn't really add up to us. But like I said, we've heard this a lot. Now, what it sounds like to me is really their training is that the higher ups are saying we need to crack down on a bunch of hours, and maybe they're seeing areas or certain social workers who are more liberally giving out protective supervision than others, and are telling them they need to cut that back. And in this particular case, the one I was talking about, the judge did not stand for it. They called him out on it and said, you can't just fall back and say you were trained differently and all of a sudden this person doesn't need protective supervision. Because they had to go back and say what actually is different, right? You can't just say, oh, we were trained better and that was it. But aside from that, so that's a recent issue. But aside from that, there can be any number of reasons that a person loses either protective supervision or just regular IHSS hours. Sometimes it might be that there was a lack of documentation. If you didn't provide something they said they needed, then they might terminate. Paramedical, for instance, is a big one for this. That they don't get the paramedical form, it might take away those hours. Protective supervision, technically they don't need forms redone year after year, but they oftentimes will ask for them. And if they ask and they don't receive them, that gives them a little bit of leverage, a little bit of ammunition to possibly remove those hours. Also, Teresa, the comment that's there, part of it got cut off. So if you could post like the second half of it, again, I appreciate it. What else? So yeah, paperwork is one thing. A big part of why people lose hours is that at the reassessment, if there's anything that was stated to be better or improved or not quite as severe as the previous year, right away, that's ammunition in their hands, right? That is them able to say, the elopement is less frequent. The elopement is, not as bad as it was before, or the headbanging is not as hard as it was before. Okay, so and all of that is always going to be something that they can point to say, here is one behavior that doesn't that no longer qualifies, because that was a critical behavior that we granted protective supervision for before, but now they've said that it's not as bad, so that's a change. We don't need to, we can take it away. Legally, when the county takes away protective supervision specifically, they have to point to one of 4 criteria to figure out why, or to explain why it was taken away. These criteria are, if I can remember it correctly, and forgive me if I might get these a little bit wrong. One is that there was a change in circumstance. that the person, the recipient, their need has changed in some way that they no longer need psych supervision. That's the most basic one. Another is that there was new information, that they didn't have all the information before. They received some new information, and that changed the whole scope of the thing. Now they can see clearly that there's no longer a need. That's the second one. A third one is that there was a change in the law. Now, this is not a reason they can use very often, where the law actually changes and makes a person ineligible. So that one, it's one of the four, but it's not one they use very often. And the last one, they will use this one sometimes, is they'll say they were correcting a mistake that they made before, that the county mistakenly granted hours, and now they're correcting that mistake. They will try and use this in hearings. They will try to say, well, previously we had granted protective supervision, but that was an error. We didn't mean to do that, or it was a mistake for us to do that, and now we're fixing that mistake. But that's really not what that criteria means. That criteria should be for they made a typo, they made an error, they confused two different cases, or someone thought they heard something and they completely misunderstood. That's what it means in the regulations when it says that the county made a mistake and is correcting it. In a lot of cases, when someone's had protective supervision for 10 years and then it gets taken away all of a sudden, they really can't use that excuse. So most often they're going to say that there was either new information or that the person's needs changed. All right, I'm going to take a pause here on the main topic and check out the comment that was left from Kuta. Hi, my son has a new worker. She recently came to do his reassessment. When I received the paperwork, it looked like she basically changed his age to 4 and used the previous worker's notes with only a few words changed. She didn't include anything I told her during the reassessment. She also didn't know anything from the ABA session notes from his new provider. Instead, she left the previous notes from his old provider that talked about him progressing. She even said that my son paced off. Hold on. Paced off because he was bored playing with his toy, even though that was not what I was explained to her during the reassessment. I feel like the reassessment, I feel like the reassessment does not accurately show his current needs and behaviors. And then she wrote that my son could follow directions, oh, sorry. If you see the notes, she really didn't write anything. Well, it's a good thing that what I want to say that it is really beneficial. It's a good thing that you are paying attention to the social worker's notes. Now, I don't know how long ago. I don't know if you said recently, so hopefully you still have time. But whether this is what we're about to get in a minute here, but whether it's a first-time assessment or a reassessment, whether they took away hours or just didn't grant hours you think you should have, in any of those circumstances, the first and most beneficial course of action is the hearing. That's the most likely way that you can actually either restore hours or get hours that were denied that you think you should have. And having the notes, both the previous year's notes and the current year's notes, is a really great place to start, and being able to read over it and say they didn't include this and this and this. Write this stuff down. Write down on paper now while you can all of the things that were written in there that either were different or did not include what was told to them. That's a good starting place, because otherwise, being able to point out that they didn't change anything from the previous year's notes, even though you've told them a bunch of new things, is going to be beneficial in the hearing. Now, when we get into talking about hearings, I will say as we get into it that very rarely do we advise anyone to do a hearing on their own, just because of how difficult it can be to overcome some of the odds against you. And you mentioned that you're waiting on a hearing. Okay, so you've already started that process. So that's what we're going to get into talking about right now. About this is the sort of the first option you have when you lose hours or when you're denied hours. She even tried to redirect him and he didn't follow her direction. Again, write all of this stuff down, because if it's not in their notes, hopefully you had someone with you at the reassessment, because that's one of the biggest things we advise. Have someone with you at the reassessment, so that's not just your word against them, because they're a government worker. They're writing, they've got their notes all typed up in a format that looks nice. And according, the court will say they've got nothing to gain, right? They've got nothing to gain from denying you hours. The social worker doesn't. And they'll say you have a lot to gain by getting hours. So if it's only your word against the social workers, you're in a bad place. So I really hope that you had someone else with you, or maybe you were able to record it, but usually they won't allow that. Regional Center? Okay, you said that Alta Regional Center. Excellent. Get them to corroborate the things that you're telling me, that they weren't able to direct him, that he wandered off, that their notes don't match what you told them. Do all you can to get Regional Center on board, because that is the biggest thing. Is there unless your word versus the county's notes, the judge, like, every single time is going to take the county's notes over your word. So get other people to agree with that. Aksoy said, "Good afternoon." Good afternoon to you too. Okay, I'll take this question, then we'll get back into our main topic. Ricardo said, "Our son, 29 years old, Down syndrome, autism reassessment is next week. There's been a change in his health. There has been a change in his health. His optometry doctor has diagnosed him legally blind. He's under protective supervision. I hope they don't take away hours from him, as we have a new caseworker." I mean, hoping the best for you. A new caseworker on a case, when someone has protective supervision, has been used in the past as we had fresh eyes on the situation. It's a new worker. And when they looked at the situation, they said he didn't need it anymore. We've definitely seen that. I definitely, by all metrics, him being diagnosed as legally blind shouldn't hurt your protective supervision eligibility. It shouldn't. But yeah, absolutely. I hope that that goes really well for you. And if it doesn't, give us a call or reach out to us on Facebook. All right. I'm going to get back into the main topic and talk a little bit about the options you have if you do get your hours taken away. And the first one we've kind of already started talking about is the hearing. So I want to put this up for everyone, because this is really important to remember when you lose your hours specifically. You have two important deadlines. You have 90 days to file for the hearing if you want to have the hearing. If you don't get your request in within 90 days, then you lose your rights. Essentially, your right to have a judge hear your case. If you haven't filed within 90 days, it's gone. And that's 90 days from the notice of action. Once you receive that denial, it says your hours have been reduced. You have 90 days. However, if you want aid paid pending, you don't have 90 days. You only have 10 days. Now, technically, it could be longer than 10 days. I believe the official rule is you have until the change takes effect to file for the hearing to get aid paid pending. So let's say if it's the first week of January and it says as of February 1st, this change is going to take effect and your hours are going to be reduced, then you have until February 1st to request the hearing. However, sometimes you might receive it the last week of the month and it will say starting next week, your hours are going to be reduced. In which case, the rules say if you have less than 10 days between the day of notice of action and the change, then they will give you 10 days. So you will always have at least 10 days, sometimes longer, but never shorter than that. So that's the safest bet, is always get your request for hearing in within 10 days to receive aid paid pending. Now that I've said that, made it super clear, what is aid paid pending? So when a person loses any hours, doesn't have to be protected supervision, doesn't have to be a large number of hours. If you lose any number of hours from your IHSS, then you have the option of requesting aid paid pending when you go to a hearing. Essentially, what the phrase means is that you will continue, your aid will continue to be paid to you pending the outcome of the hearing. So when you request it, even though they said they're going to reduce your hours, if you request the hearing within the time frame, then the reduction in hours will not go into effect until the hearing is over. So if you have 283 hours and they're going to reduce it by 200, you get aid paid pending. You keep your 283 hours for however long it takes. If it takes 5 months before the hearing is finally concluded, you will continue to get your 283 hours for all those 5 months. Otherwise, if you don't get aid paid pending, you're going to get your hours reduced. You're going to be at 80 or 70 or whatever gets reduced to, and you're going to be stuck at 70 until the end of the hearing. Now, you might get those hours back if you win the hearing, but with aid paid pending, you'll keep getting your hours so that you don't have any problems financially. You don't, have any hiccups in your day-to-day life. And then even if you lose the hearing after those 3 or 5 or 6 or 12 months, even if you lose your hearing, you don't have to pay back any of the money that you received during that time. So that's something that I want to make really clear, because this only applies to people who lose hours. If you were applying for the first time and you were denied, or if you had a reassessment and they denied you protected supervision again, then aid paid pending doesn't really apply to that. But if you lose hours, especially a big chunk of hours, this is really important to know. So if you ever lose it, and here's the thing about it. The thing about it is, if you lose hours and you want to request a hearing, but you're not sure if you'll win, maybe they had a good reason to, but you haven't quite decided, just go ahead and request a hearing, because you can always withdraw it later if you feel that you don't have a strong case, or you think it would be better to just go to the reassessment, maybe, get more evidence and try again later. That's fine. But if you're going to lose a large number of hours, request a hearing immediately, get aid paid pending, and then you can decide whether or not you want to pursue the hearing. If you find out later on that you don't have a good case, you can always withdraw, and that's no big deal. So those are the two big deadlines when it comes to the hearing. Now, of course, at the hearing, you'll want to prepare documents, arguments, like we were just talking about. So some of the comments here about get the notes from the social worker from their assessment. Read over the notes, find anything that doesn't make sense, find anything that contradicts what you told them. If you have documents from regional center, from the school, if you have documents from the doctor, find the things in their writing that contradicts what regional center has observed, contradicts what the doctor has observed. These are all really helpful things to do before you go to a hearing. And of course, like I briefly talked about before, get assistance if you can. If regional center is willing to step in and be there with you, do that. If you can get an advocate, that's great. At the very least, have someone else who has done this before. If you have like a friend or another parent who has gone through this before, have them join you if no one else. All these things are really vital so that you're not alone, because the county is not going to be alone. There's going to be 2, maybe 3 or more county people present at the hearing. And if it's just you by yourself, it's going to get overwhelming. And it's hard to keep your notes straight and the things you want to say straight if you're all by yourself. So that's the hearing. We could talk on for a very long time about all that we could do at a hearing, but I want to briefly talk about what happens after that. So, like I said, you can withdraw. If you withdraw your hearing, there's 2 different kinds of withdrawals. There is a unconditional withdrawal, just a regular withdrawal, and that is you decide you don't want a hearing anymore, and you said, okay, I don't want to pursue this right now. I'm going to just withdraw my hearing and we'll move on. And at that point, it's done. The hours, whatever the county said they're going to do, are going to go into effect. If you had a bid pending, it'll end, and then you'll just move on to the next assessment whenever that will be. The other kind of withdrawal is a conditional withdrawal, and this will sometimes happen. I don't know how often, really, with people who are not represented by an advocate. I don't know how frequent this is, but for us, when we do our advocacy and we're dealing with the counties, it's fairly often that we'll get a conditional withdrawal. And this can mean that perhaps leading up to the hearing, before the hearing takes place, the county might decide, we're not sure we made the right decision. We'd like to review the evidence again, maybe we'll even come out and do another assessment, and or maybe even send a different social worker to come out and do an assessment, and maybe we'll change our mind. And they might do this when they are feeling not so confident that they made the right choice. And so this can be a beneficial thing, that you can avoid the hearing and get another shot at convincing the social worker, or even a different social worker, that you have the need, that whatever they took away. Aside from that, if you go through with the hearing and you lose, the only other due process method of going beyond that is you can request a rehearing, which is very rare to get granted unless there was like a very serious procedural issue with the hearing, or you can appeal it to a higher court. And I just want to point out that while we have resources, we can do that. We have a lawyer that we work with that we can send cases to if we really think they should go to a higher court. Very quickly, that process becomes oftentimes not worth the trouble and the burden, because while the regular hearing process can take, anywhere from 3 to 6 months, probably, the appeal process or the writ process, oftentimes the case doesn't even start until it's been 12 months. So the time frame of getting this case heard at higher and higher courts, it just gets longer and longer, and oftentimes it's not worth it when you could just try again at the next assessment. Okay, well, I'm going to check the comment section, and then we'll get into the other options that you have. Let's see. Kuda said she used the old IEP because I didn't give her a new one. I told her it's not complete yet. That does happen. For people who aren't aware, this is talking about previous comments she made about she had her reassessment, and this new social worker didn't really do much to change any of the notes from the previous year, despite all the things he was told about. I told her he's been crying for 2 hours before she came. Nothing noted about that. I told her he eloped the week before, and it's noted in ABA's doctor letter IPP. She didn't note that anyway. Okay, that's a really big one. Like the fact that he had an elopement incident and it's noted in other places, and that's not even in the notes. That's pretty bad. Macasoy says, very education, keep up the good work. Thank you, I appreciate it, and thank you for being here. And again, if anyone has comments, we while I have a topic to talk about, I'm always happy to pivot to what people want to talk about, because that's what's on your mind, and that's probably going to be more useful to you than whatever I planned out this week. She has me what he does at night. I said he will wake up and leave the room. She wrote down he wakes up and stays inside the room. Okay, that's another thing. Again, you said you had the regional center person with you. If you told her one thing and she wrote the opposite, absolutely make sure that the other person, whoever else was there, was aware of that, took note of it. If they can't be at the hearing, have them write down a letter, have them sign it that says, I read the social worker's notes. They wrote the opposite of what we told them. Because that's going to be just really strong in the hearing to say, this social worker, their notes are so bad. We told them one thing, they wrote the opposite. That's a great thing to include. But it can't just be from you. It has to be from the other person who was there at the assessment as well. That's the most important thing. She asked me what he does when he sleeps. So he will leave room and find him in the living room. She wrote down that he was up and just stays inside the room. Again, same deal. It's like, just make sure it's on record. Ricardo, are the hearing subject to public records, or does HIPAA restrict for public record? The hearing decision, what the outcome that the judge writes down, that can be publicly accessed. However, it does not include the personal information of who the recipient or the provider or the parties involved are. I think it also doesn't include the name of the judge involved. I can't quite remember that. So it's sort of a censored or a redacted version. So the judge's decision is of record, and the recording that they make, if you are a party of the hearing, then you can request the recording after it's done. But the hearing recording is not, as far as I'm aware, I'm pretty sure, it is not publicly available for just anyone. It would just be for the parties that are involved. Lori said, okay, so we should have an advocate present on reassessment, even if we did not at last visit. I did aid paid pending and a conditional withdrawal 2 visits ago. Do they give you notes? Okay, I didn't quite understand the last part of your comment, but I can address some of the other things.
So she wants to know if she can have access to the notes that they take.
Oh, like, can you get the notes?
I believe you can.
Oh, do they give you the notes from the yeah, you're right. So I'm pretty sure you can request the notes one way or another. When you go to the hearing, even if they're like dragging their feet and it's hard to get the notes from them, inevitably they will eventually have to post their statement of position, and their notes will be included in that. Now, technically, they don't have to post that until within 2 days of the hearing date. But if they post a statement of position and it just arrives, usually if it's the first time, you can request a postponement and say, look, I just got their statement of position. I need time to address some of the things written in here. So I need a postponement. That can give you some time to review their notes before the hearing takes place. What else did you ask? Should you have an advocate present? Now, of course, I would say yes. Like, it's always great to have an advocate present at your reassessment. But I will say, if you've had, hours for quite a while, they're pretty stable, you don't necessarily need an advocate. But like I was saying to Kuta earlier, I really hope I'm saying your name right. Apologies if I'm not. But as I was saying before, at the very least, having some other third party, a friend, someone from the school, someone from regional center, someone, their ABA therapist, their respite worker, having anyone there who can just be there as another pair of ears, and even better if they'll actually write down the stuff that's talked about, even better. But just someone else who can corroborate your story, who can say, yeah, they told the social worker that he elopes every single day, and yet in their notes they wrote down that it's less than once a week. What's up with that? Having just anyone else present other than yourself is going to massively increase your chances at a hearing, because if it's just your word against theirs, you're going to be in a really bad spot. And you mentioned you'd done aid paid pending and conditional withdrawal. Yeah, that all of that is something I anytime you lose hours, I highly recommend aid paid pending, because like I said, if at a certain point you get to saying either a conditional withdrawal or even a complete withdrawal sometime later, it's better to not lose your hours in the temporary when you might still be able to fight the thing in the hearing. And if you decide later that you can't, you're really not missing out. Like, there's no penalty for taking aid paid pending and then eventually deciding that you can't go forward with the hearing. Kuja said, my last hearing was 7 people, 4 were from the county. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, where especially in some, in some more like contentious counties, there's always going to be the hearing officer and the social worker who did the assessment, sometimes a supervisor, sometimes a public health nurse. There could even be more than that other times, but there's always going to be the hearing officer and the social worker, and very often their supervisor as well. So yeah, it can be overwhelming with how many people they have on their side. Sometimes they'll tag team and they'll jump in together on it. And if there were even more people at your assessment, then you can bet there's going to be a lot of people at the hearing. All right, and you said, I gave her pictures of himself with marks from hitting himself. Teacher emailed me about him doing it also. She didn't note that anywhere. Again, that's a really big one. Now, if you gave them the documents, also a good thing to do at the hearing is give the judge the same documents and say, I gave them these documents at the assessment, because the judge, whenever you give them new documents, is going to want to know, well, did you give this to the county? Why have you been holding on to this? But if you gave it to them, that really is helpful if you can say, yeah, they had this information and they did not note it. She wrote he cried, jumped up and down. Teacher gave him a toy chicken. He stopped, so he was able to be redirected. The letter I gave her was from the teacher, and it said he was crying off and on, scratching himself and jumping up and down, and they gave him a toy chicken. He chewed on it, but was still observed doing the same behavior, crying off and on. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot. It sounds like you've done actually a pretty good job already of identifying a lot of the contradictions and a lot of the things in the notes that do not match up. It's just a matter, at this point, I'd say it's just a matter of getting these things that you've pointed out, the letters, the statements from the teacher and the regional center, whoever else, and presenting it opposed to the county notes to say their notes are all wrong. But also, it's not enough just to say that they're wrong. You do also have to prove that there is a need for protective supervision. So you want to have a solid case aside from that, but it's a really good place to be able to discredit some of their things, to say the frequency of elopement they list is wrong. The frequency of self-injurious behavior, the severity of self-injurious behavior, of everything they write is all wrong. Here's all the reasons why. And then that easily leads you into, and therefore he needs protective supervision because he does this with this frequency. Because if you can discredit the frequency they write and then present a credible frequency of your own that is backed up by the teacher and by the doctor and by the regional center, then the judge can go with that because the county's been shown to be not credible. That's a big part of it. I handed the documents to her in front of Alta and emailed it to her also. Yeah, having record of all that, especially having the email, is great. Okay, let's get into the topic a little bit more, and then hopefully I'll have a few more minutes by the end that we can handle any last minute questions. So beyond the hearing, whether you decide not to go to the hearing, or you try to go to the hearing and withdrew, or you went to the hearing and were denied, what's after that? So aside from rehearings and appeals and all of that, like I was talking about, you have two other options for trying to get the hours back. One is that if there is a change sometime between one assessment and the next yearly assessment, if there is a identifiable, articulable change in the recipient's behaviors, in their needs, then you can request a reassessment at any time. Anytime you can tell the county there's been a change in the recipient's needs, they are required to do a reassessment. Now, they do not necessarily have to do a reassessment of the whole case if there's been a change in just one area. And they do not also necessarily have to come out to the home to reassess if there's been a change. For example, if you call the county and you say, there's been a change in the need, we have to take our child to therapy one time a week. He didn't have therapy before, he has it now. Now, once a week, there's a half an hour drive that we have to do back and forth. Then they can take that information from you over the phone and say, okay, we will make the change. And they will add the 1 hour per week for transportation to medical appointments or transportation to necessary appointments. And they can make that change just by talking to you over the phone, reviewing the documents and saying, okay, here's a basic change. We can make that. There we go. You can also send them new documents and say, here's new information, here's things. But they could do just a paper review of the case and say, all right, we've reviewed the documents, we've compared it with the notes that we had, and there is not a change there. And ultimately, new information does not necessarily indicate a change in circumstance that requires a reassessment. But if there is something, if there's a significant new behavior, or if they've lost physical functioning in one way or another, then that can be a sufficient reason to say there's a significant difference in this person's abilities compared to the last reassessment, and we need a new reassessment. That could apply, and that could affect many categories or just a few specific ones. Then they can come out and they can review those categories with you. You can give them all the information again. And this is an opportunity. If there is a if there's a reasonable difference that a more frequent elopement, for example, for protective supervision, or a new paramedical need. If they're coming back to reassess those categories, that is an opportunity to present them with your whole case on protective supervision, right? Even if it's just one thing that's changed, this is an opportunity to present them with all new documents to cover the whole category and your whole reasoning for why you believe your child or recipient needs protective supervision. So that's your second option, is if there is a change in between first assessment, or rather the reassessment that took away the hours, and your next yearly reassessment. If there's a change, you can bring it up and try to get those hours back. And then your last option, if the hearing doesn't work out, if there isn't a change in between, your last option is just to wait for the yearly reassessment. So they're going to come back. They do it every year. And when that happens, that is your next opportunity to represent their whole case. Technically, they are supposed to review the categories from scratch. So it's like a brand new case, fresh eyes. You can explain to them exactly, or re-explain to them exactly the reasons why you believe that they need more hours in bathing or dressing or paramedical or protective supervision. The reassessment, the yearly reassessment, is always going to be your sort of last option once the hearing is passed and any other change in need or change in circumstance reassessments in between. So that's sort of like, if you lose hours, those are pretty much your three big options. The hearing, which can go on to further hearings and other things like that, or it can go to conditional withdrawals. But if the hearing doesn't work out, a change in need assessment can happen anytime throughout the year if there's been a change in need. And lastly is the next year's assessment is your last option. All right. It's about 12:45. I'm going to get through the questions. I think I've presented pretty much everything I wanted to tell you guys about this topic. So if you have any questions, any follow-up questions, anything we talked about, leave them now, because I'm going to go through these, and then once we're done, I'll sign out. So let me see what people are saying. Sarah said, hi. Hello. Thank you for being here. Galt Advocacy said, remember that we are going over hearings because we know not everyone can or will choose to have an advocate with you. However, if you can have an advocate with you, please do. You want someone with experience in your corner. Yeah, that's really the essence of it. And that's why I say, of course, we'd always say yes to having an advocate. And we understand that, maybe in your area, maybe you don't have good price options or whatnot, or you don't feel like it's worth it to you. But at the very least, if you're not going to have an advocate, have someone, especially a professional, who doesn't have a personal reason. Excuse me. Someone who's not going to have a personal bias in the eyes of the judge to want to help you. Because that's the issue that you're always going to run into is, oh, this is your friend or your family member, or this is someone who knows you personally who's going to agree with you no matter what you say. But if it's from the school or a ABA therapist or a regional center worker, even if you're friends with them, they're going to hold a lot more weight. And especially an advocate's going to hold a lot of weight compared to just a personal connection. Ricardo said, I'd send a message. I sent Galt a message about recording a meeting, was told as long as the caseworker consents, we could, but if not, we can't. But they're public servants, so if they're doing county state business, we still need to get consent. I mean, I don't want to comment on the law itself, but for the circumstance of IHSS and the work that we do, yes, it's unfortunately they can't. It's almost strange, because for IEP meetings, you can absolutely record them as long as you give them 24 hours advance notice. And the same for regional center meetings as well, that they, by law, cannot deny you to record as long as you've given them advance notice. Yet for some reason, when an IHSS social worker comes into your own home to do this assessment and writes notes about everything that's talked about, and this is actually extremely important, like what was actually said is extremely important for your life, for some reason, you don't get the same protections as you do in an IEP meeting or a IPP meeting. And ultimately, it just comes down to that California does require consent for recording unless in special circumstances, and the assessment meeting is not considered one of those special circumstances. MS said hi. I think Teresa basically said the same thing I did, that we think it should be this way, and I absolutely social worker is going to come into your home, like surely you should have the right to record them. Actually, let me go back to this for 1 second, and I want to bring up a different topic, because this was extremely effective in one case that we did have. Is that when you have, and this is not so much going to be inside the home, but outside of the home, when you have cameras that are already up, let's like
Inside
at
the
your
home too, they're wired in.
it can be inside the home as well. But if you have cameras that are like watching the front door or the driveway or things like that, we had one case. It was honestly almost funny to see in video form, where the social worker had done their assessment. They had finished everything up. They walked outside, and this was all caught on camera on the driveway, because they had one over their garage. And the social worker walked outside. They got in their car, and before they drove away, the child who they'd been assessing this whole time, the child opened the front door and ran out the front door and ran right down the sidewalk, right past the social worker's car, like right in front of him. And then immediately after that, the child's mom runs right after her, also right past the social worker's car, and grabs her and carries her back inside the house. And then as that is all happening, you just see the social worker just pull out and drive away. And in their notes, they had said, we didn't have evidence the child elopes, but we had it on video. The child eloped right in front of their car right after the assessment happened. And it was very hard for them to explain in the hearing, like, how is it you saw this happen and didn't believe that the child needed protective supervision? It was one of those situations where, because it's a camera that's already there for security reasons, there's no need for consent to have that camera recording. And so because it's plainly visible and it doesn't record audio, which is an important thing for the law. But yeah. Okay, so what other comments do we have? Kuda, going back to the topic we had before. So if I gave her a lot of documents and the only thing that came back in the packet is a protective supervision document, does that mean she didn't include them? His doctor wrote letters also, nothing mentioned about it either. I mean, yeah, if you gave them a bunch of documents and then in their evidence they just didn't include any of it, I would point that out also in the hearing and say, all of these documents were provided at the assessment and they seem to have deliberately not included it, and that could have an effect on the judge. But again, like I said before, while it is very helpful to discredit their notes, it is not sufficient to only discredit their notes to get protective supervision. You also have to provide sufficient evidence and a sufficient argument to show that you need protective supervision. He chewed a toy in front of her and she wrote he attempted and paced off after Alta instructed him because he was bored. I mean, we could go on this. It sounds like they really got a lot of things wrong. As far as the chewing the toy, depending on the circumstance, the judge might not see that as problematic, depending on if it's a choking hazard or if it's something that's meant to be chewed or is safe to be chewed. That's a whole other topic. Ricardo said, if we have it in a place, public place, not in our home, we can or can't. Generally, it's like it's been a little while since I've read it on it, but generally, if it's in a like if it's in a place where there is not an expectation of privacy, such as your front porch or your driveway or the sidewalk, then it's fine. It might still not be fine for recording audio, but if it's a place that a person would reasonably expect privacy, such as inside your home, then it's more of a problem, and it needs to be publicly. There needs to be like public signage or very clear signs that it is that they're being recorded. And if they are being recorded inside your home and they ask you to turn it off, then you are required to.
Unless you can't. Unless it's wired in and it's a live.
Well, I don't think there's any home security system that you can't physically turn off as the person who owns it. At least there shouldn't be. But that's the general gist of it. Is if it's on your front porch or in your driveway, in that area where there's no expectation of privacy, then you're fine to record. But if it's inside your home where there's a expectation of privacy, then it needs to be clearly visible, and you have to turn it off if they request.
If you tell them 24 hours ahead of time that there is recording, that it's there for your child's safety, can they choose to then meet with you elsewhere or do a phone one if they so choose?
I don't think it makes any difference. I think it's still the same situation that they can still request you turn it off, and you are legally required to.
They don't know.
It's almost pointed towards you. Okay, so if anyone who didn't hear the question, Teresa was asking if you gave them 24 hours advance notice, could they, and said that it was that you were recording inside the home for your child's safety. Could you do it then, or could they instead do the assessment in a different, public place? And what I think is the answer to that is that they have to do. For one thing, they have to do the assessment at the home is kind of part of the deal, and that I think regardless of how much advance notice you give, they can still request that you turn it off. Okay. Kuda said, I told her I have a video of him eloping to the stop sign. We live by a busy street, and she declined to watch it. Man, the social worker you're describing, it sounds really not interested in doing her job. Like of all things, say they don't even want to see. I mean, unless the assessment had been going on for 3 hours already and you'd already shown them 4 other videos, but my goodness. Mama's Ring doorbell is noted, which was what the previous. Oh, so all they wrote down was that you had a Ring doorbell and didn't mention that you had a video of the elopement happening. Yeah, I mean, this is all. I'll say it one more time. We're getting to the end, and I'll have to hop off here. But I'll say it one more time. The thing that I've said pretty much this whole time is, all of this is very beneficial to show the judge, say, look, we provided them with all these documents. We told them these things. None of this was included in their estimation. And honestly, if you present some of these things to the hearing representative, I don't know if maybe you've tried this already, but this is the kind of situation where they might consider doing a conditional withdrawal, saying, look, we've seen the video you presented. We've seen all these other documents that the social worker did not put in the file. We've seen, all these other things. Let's negotiate. Let's reconsider. So this could be a situation where the county might be willing to either reassess or even just grant the hours outright. Granting the hours outright is very, very rare, and I wouldn't count on it. But they might propose that to you. And if they propose it to the judge and say, look, we offered to do a reassessment when we saw this new evidence, the judge might push you to accept that. So the hearing rep hasn't contacted you yet. Well, just keep that in mind. They might reach out to you. And if they do, when they see all this new evidence, they might want to offer a reassessment. And oftentimes, if one of the parties offers a conditional withdrawal, the judge is going to be a little bit they'll be a little bit biased against you if you refuse a condition withdrawal to reassess. At least that's our experience, that it's better to accept it, to not waste the judge's time, because then that might put them in a situation where they're prejudiced against you. And yeah, having Teresa said this, is that having regional center show up is awesome, and I wish we had more caseworkers who were willing to do that. So that's a great thing to have in your corner. All right, I'm gonna end it there. I gotta make some time. We are going live in Spanish today, right? Yeah. Okay, we're gonna be going live in Spanish today, so it should be the same topic. So if you speak Spanish, you can stick around. They're going to be talking about the same things. We might have some different questions. They may have a new perspective on some of these things, different than what I do. So thank you all for being here. We had a lot of great questions, a lot of good discussion. And is it Q&A next week?
Yep.
Q&A is next week. So it's going to be me and hopefully someone else here as well. Maybe Caleb, maybe somebody else. And we will just be tackling all questions from all types of special needs areas and aspects of the. I don't know. It's almost 1 o'clock. I'm ready for lunch. I don't have words anymore. But again, thank you all for being here. It was a great stream, and I will see you all next week. All right. Have a happy weekend.